Welcome to our NCJW Arizona monthly program. This one particularly timely. It's Women's History Month. It's also 100 years since the ERA was introduced. And we are at a unfortunate, dangerous inflection point today. Not only have reproductive rights and access to abortion been restricted and banned, the lack of pay equity. 20 years ago, white women were earning 80 cents to the dollar. 20 years later, it's only 82. And for women of color, indigenous women, it's less. And even though we tend to think that women have made progress in political life, the fact is that only 25% of the Senate, US Senate women, and despite the visibility of some very prominent corporate CEOs, the fact is that within Fortune 500 companies, the percentages are still very low of women executives. So we seem to be moving backwards. I just spoke to a group of high school students a few weeks ago, and I said, it's like back to the future here. We are facing the same problems that we faced generation or two ago. So how do we remedy that? What stands in the way of equal pay for women? How do we finally get the ERA, which has been ratified by the requisite number of states, on the congressional agenda? How do we get Congress to eliminate the time frame restrictions, which they have the power to do? We're going to look at the issue of how far have we really come? And I would like to note that this is an issue and all of the overlapping intersectional issues that NCJW-AZ focuses on. This is what our mission is, to improve the quality of life, to protect the rights and expand the rights of women and in turn, families, and everybody's constitutional and fundamental human rights. So with that, I would like to turn the program over to Anita Malik, our Director of Advocacy, and her team.
Great. Thank you, Sivia. Thank you all for being here. As Sivia noted, well, in the title of this program, we haven't come a long way, baby. So we are going back. We're repeating history. And, you know, as we sit here today, we know any minute now, really any day now, there will be a ruling about abortion medication. So are we going to have the abortion pill banned? We're going to hear about that any day. And we're keeping in mind that that same pill is used, you know, for miscarriage treatment. And I bring that up because there's a tie-in here. We as a country are so behind on women's rights. We all know that sitting here in this group, but we don't have paid leave. They're attacking our healthcare. They're also attacking our paychecks. I happen to run a global team in operations. And one of the things that is so striking to me as we talk about miscarriage and women's paid leave and access is that here in this country, you all know we have FMLA. There are some concessions for that to be used for a woman that has a miscarriage that needs to take time off. Unpaid leave. Unpaid leave. Let's remember that. Let's keep saying it's unpaid. We need paid leave in this country. I have teams in Australia. I have teams in India. And in India national law, there is a statute specifically for miscarriages, paid leave. You see that across the world, not in the United States. So they're attacking our families. They're attacking that infrastructure that we need. And coming out of the pandemic, we all had hoped. We had hoped there would be some change in this, that people would see that the burden on women and make that change in the workplace, but that change still hasn't occurred. And as Sivia noted, too few women are in leadership in corporate America. Only 1 in 4 is in the C-suite. It seems sometimes that we've made improvement on that, But if you look at the data, the numbers are still far too wide. And why are women in those leadership positions? And it's something I hope we get into more today, actually leaving the workforce. Why are senior corporate positions now being vacated, mass exodus by women? Why? Because we didn't make good on those promises after the pandemic. We didn't create the infrastructure. Again, back to paid, I will keep saying paid leave. Women have realized that companies are not prioritizing their mental health, the balance, the work-life family balance, diversity, equity, and inclusion, everything that we thought would come out of that trying time for our country and for the world. And so we are here today, as Sylvia noted, to really talk about how do we actually make that change? How do we take those core principles we know we so badly need to make this work, not just for our healthcare, but also equal pay, which equal pay is about justice. It's about respect. It's about valuing what women bring to this society. And truly, it makes sense economically. Well, we're not going to get to cover all that tonight, but we do want to cover what is going on, the state for women today in this country, talk about what we can do here in Arizona, some great action items for all of you to actually take actions to be down at the Capitol and to raise your voice. And so with that, we'll get straight into it. And I would just like to say, please stay muted if you can throughout the program. We would love your questions, so please add those into the chat. We'll have some time for Q&A towards the end with our panelists. So at that point, if you'd like to actually say your question and engage in conversation, please raise your hand, but we will also read questions from the chat. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to a team member on our advocacy board here, Megan Kramer, who's going to take over this panel and introduce our panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. I'll start by introducing our panelists, and we got an excellent team for this panel because we have folks who have been fighting historically for this ERA for a long time, and we have people who are still very active, all three of them still very active in the current fight, two of whom sit in our legislature now and are working on these issues today, tomorrow. So first, Representative Nancy Gutierrez is a member of our Arizona House of Representatives from Legislative District 18 in Tucson. And Representative Gutierrez is a member of the Arizona Education Association and a delegate to their annual delegate assembly, and a longtime advocate on women's issues. In 2018, she was elected president of the Tucson chapter of National Organization for Women. And Priya Sundareshan is a member of the Arizona Senate, also from Arizona's 18th legislative district, a couple of Tucson ladies today. And in addition to holding elected office, Senator Sundareshan serves as the director of Natural Resource Use and Management Clinic at the University of Arizona James E. Rogers College of Law. And I got to tell you, it's really fun to call her senator because she's a classmate of mine from law school, and it has not gotten old yet. So welcome to Priya. And Diane Post, I think, probably needs no introduction in this group. Diane has been a longtime advocate on the issues we're going to talk about tonight, and she has worked in 15 countries to design and implement fundamental legal policy and programmatic reform on issues related to gender equality. And domestically, this is her issue. And so we've got an expert in the room. So I want to thank you all for coming. And I think we'll start because there's a long history here. Diane has prepared a slideshow so we can sort of go through the history and sort of level set everyone. Where are we now? So I'm going to share my screen here. You just bear with me one moment. Actually, you know what? Sydney, if you don't mind giving me permission to share screen, and I'll get it up in just a moment here. There we go. All right, Diane, take it away.
Okay, next slide. As Sylvia said earlier, tomorrow will be the 100th anniversary of the Equal Rights Amendment being introduced into Congress. The first one there is what it originally said. It actually mentioned men and women, but that was changed over the years to what you see below, and that is what we are talking about now. Next. There's a funny story about this. In 1972, I happened to be down in Green Valley giving a talk about the ERA, and I started, talking, and one of the women told me she told all of us, she worked for Martha Griffiths when she moved into Congress. She was the secretary for her. So, when you move into a new building or new office, you clear out all of the desks and the drawers and to put your stuff in. So she was clearing out a filing cabinet, Martha was, and she picked it up, and there was a manila folder. Some of us are old enough to remember manila folders with a little label on it, and the label said broads. Now, Martha Griffiths looked at this and said, well, what could this be about? Broads. So she opened the manila folder, and there was the Equal Rights Amendment. So the person who had occupied that office before her thought that should be filed under broads, and it went nowhere, of course. Well, that made her mad, and so she decided it was going to be passed. She failed the first time, but she succeeded the second time. Notice no Arizona senator or representative voted for it. And notice the other thing, that the preface is where the timeline is. It is not in the body of the amendment. It is in the preface. And any attorney will tell you that the language in the preface is not the law. It's the introduction or the explanation of the law. And when you put it in the law books, that doesn't go in the law books. Just the actual law part goes in the law books. And that's not what states ratified. They didn't ratify the preface, they ratified the ERA. Next. Next. So Hawaii ratified, as I said, it went very quickly, and we got 35 states by 1979, but that's when the stop came. Notice who funded Phyllis Schlafly. I was working on it at that time, and I didn't realize that. Of course, I didn't know where her funding was coming from. It was the Koch brothers, the very same Koch brothers that are still busy today stopping any kind of forward progress for human rights for women and everybody else. So, of course, ratification stopped. Next, and we got the timeline extended, but no new ratifications came in. Now, these are the Arizona attempts. It was first introduced in 1972. I think that's wrong. I think it's 74. Might have been 73 by Sandra Day O'Connor. Everybody knows who Sandra Day O'Connor is, and she was a Republican. She's the one that introduced it. And we use that a lot with the Republicans, that, what's the matter with you people? You idolize her, but yet she's the one that introduced this, and it failed. After she left, and in 75 and 79, it was introduced by Sister Claire Dunn. She was a practicing Catholic sister, the only one in the nation who was an active sister at the time she was working for the Equal Rights Amendment. So again, we use this to our advantage to argue that why are you opposed now? You shouldn't be. Here she was at that time trying to do that. But the last time it was voted on was in 1979, and it failed. But what's interesting was it failed in committee, but because they really wanted to humiliate women, they voted for it on the floor anyway. Normally, if it fails in committee, you don't go on and vote it on the floor. It's already dead. But they voted on the floor just to really teach the women a lesson. Don't be bringing up your equal rights again. And here we are. We still have not passed it, and it's 2023. So it was introduced on and off over the years, and we've missed a few years, but every year since 2020, it's been introduced in both houses. It has never been assigned to the committee. A committee was never assigned to an agenda. We had floor maneuvers in 2017 to try to get it to be heard. They failed because those who agreed to do it walked out of the Republicans who agreed to work with us, walked out of the room at the time the vote came. We had a motion to discharge in 2018, and that resulted in an hour or two of discussion about it. So at least we got some comments, shall we say, about some of those who gave their opinions of what they thought about it. And again, we had Republican women who had said they would vote for us, hiding in the back so that they wouldn't have to vote on it when the time came. And we tried a motion to waive rules in 2021. That did not work. And we're going to have a little fun action tomorrow. And so maybe Nancy Gutierrez can tell you more about that. Yay. Okay. She's clapping at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And we hope that you will all be down in the House gallery next. So this is the 2023 introduction. There were actually 3 introduced. HCR 2013 was introduced by Amish Shah, but he didn't collaborate with anybody and nobody even knew about it. That was already done. And he's the only Democrat that did not sign this because he had already introduced his own. So this is the House one, HCR 2030, and the Senate one, SCR 1017. And I believe all well, I could count, but anyway, I think all the Democratic senators are on it too. But this year we don't have any Republicans. We have had Republicans on it in prior years, but we don't have this year. Next. So after the stoppage of the passages of the states in 35, we had the 35 states, but then everything came to a screeching halt. A national discussion ensued about, well, what should we do? Should we start over or should we try the 3-state strategy? And the 3-state strategy was get those 3 states, even though this time has passed, because then we will have, there's no timeline, there's no deadline on how long it says these have to be. If you remember the Madison Amendment, that was put out in 1792 with the original amendments. So in the 1700s, it went out to the states and was never passed. And it was actually the First Amendment, but it never passed. So we now have what is the First Amendment, but that really was the First Amendment. And that amendment, the Madison Amendment, was that a sitting legislator cannot increase his or her, well, there was no hers, his own salary. So if you vote for a salary increase for the senators or representatives, you can only see that the next time after an election. So you can't vote a raise for yourself. If you vote for a raise, you might not be sitting in that seat when the raise happens. So that went out in the 1700s, did not pass, passed 200 years later. 200 years had passed, and that finally got passed because some kid decided, well, we should pass this, and got it active, and away it went, and it happened. So there was no timeline there, was there? Over 200 years had passed, and we still passed the Madison Amendment, which was the 27th Amendment. All right, so we went for the 3-state strategy and succeeded in that. Nevada passed it in 2017, Illinois in 2018, and Virginia in 2020. And it was January 27th. So if you notice, if you look at the first slide, there's a 2-year period in which before it goes into effect. That 2-year period is so that states can conform their laws to the new amendment, so they're not in violation of it. So it actually went into effect January 27, 2022. And we had an event here in Arizona. We had a big celebration and party at that time. And Megan worked on this other thing that we did with the ARA Task Force, which was we've gone through all of the Arizona laws and produced a 653-page book of what laws in Arizona need to change in order to comply with the Equal Rights Amendment. So when Virginia passed it, that made the Article 5 constitutional requirement, which is that 3/4 of the states pass it. So that was done. So the archivist, who didn't exist when we first passed the Constitution, but was created later by statute, he had already listed Nevada and Illinois as ratified, but when it came to Virginia, he didn't. Why? Because number 45 told Barr, who was his attorney general at the time, to send a memo to the archivist telling him he couldn't do it. Next slide. So he sent that memo, and it was a terrible memo. But anyway, so the archivist didn't do it. Now we're mad at the archivist too, because he didn't need to ask for that and he didn't need to listen to it, but he did. So he's now retired. So he didn't publish it. Now, the thing is, it does not have to be published by the archivist to be law. The publication or non-publication does not impact whether or not it has met the constitutional requirements. It's nice to be published so people can read it and see it and know that it's in the Constitution, but it has not changed the legality of it or the existence of it, because that is decided by the Constitution, Article 5. All right. So of course there are lawsuits. Everybody knew there would be lawsuits. After the 13th Amendment was passed for ending slavery, there were lawsuits. 14th Amendment, equal protection, there were lawsuits. 15th Amendment, black men able to vote, there were lawsuits. There, 19th Amendment, when women could vote, there were lawsuits. So we knew there would be lawsuits, and here's some of them. And the first two are still not going anywhere. Alabama's been dismissed. Boston, they tried to jump to the Supreme Court, which they said no and returned them to district court to start over. The third one is the most important one, and that was filed by the three attorneys generals of Nevada, Illinois, and Virginia. Virginia dropped out when they became a Republican governor, so he dropped out of the lawsuit, but the other two went. And we just got our decision the end of February. We lost, but we didn't lose badly. The judge ruled on a very narrow issue that the attorneys general of these two states had not proven a strong enough case to institute mandamus. Now, mandamus is a legal procedure whereby you can force a government official to do something if they have a clear duty to do it and there is no discretion. It's a very high bar. So what the judge said was, you did not meet that high bar, so you do not have standing, or you do not have the ability to bring the case, so we're going to dismiss it. He said nothing about the timeline. He said nothing about the states that have tried to rescind. He said nothing about anything else. What he did say was, I'm agreeing with the lower court decision. And in the lower court decision, it said what I just said, that publication or lack thereof does not impact the validity of the amendment. So in a sideways manner, he agreed with that, but he didn't hurt us in that he didn't say anything about timeline or rescission. Next slide. So I already said all of that. Next slide. So what's happening now is, of course, well, two things are happening now. The Senate had their first hearing on the ERA in 40 years to keep the visibility up. The Senate has SJ Resolution 4, which says that the ERA timeline is ineffective and that the ERA is in place. Both Arizona senators have signed on to that, so we don't have any work to do there. House Joint Resolution 25 says the same thing. Oh, there are 52 people signed on the Senate Joint Resolution 4. So 50 Democrats and 2 Republicans. On the HJ Res 25, there's 169 people signed on that. The 2 Democrats have signed on it, Stanton and who's our other Democrat? Gallego. Who has not signed on it is Grijalva. And I don't know why he hasn't signed on it. I think he just forgot, or he hasn't got to it, or whatever. I've called him a couple of times. And so if anybody, if he's your representative, please call him and get on his case. He signed it before, so I'm sure he will. He just hasn't done it. No Republicans have signed it. None. But you still, if they are your representatives in Congress, still contact them and ask them to sign on HJ Res 25. Why? Because they say, well, nobody ever contacts us. That's what they say. Nobody ever contacts us because you know they're not going to do it, so you don't contact them. Well, then they use that as an excuse. Well, women in Arizona don't care about this because nobody ever contacts it. So that's where we are with that. Now, the problem with that is that we can't get it through the House. Even if we can get it through the Senate, we can't get it through the House. Last time we got it through the House twice, we couldn't get it through the Senate. Now we might get it through the Senate and we can't get it through the House, so long as the House is controlled by Republicans. Next slide. So we're doing a lot of state actions to bring momentum and to keep the ERA in the limelight. They're working on state ERAs, states that don't already have them, doing that analysis of laws on what needs to change, as I mentioned to you. Two are doing it, California and Illinois. There are 8 others. I've mentioned 2 of them there, but there are 8 others who have already embarked on this process. We're also getting resolutions from states that say, hey, yay, welcome ERA, glad to see you're here. 2 have been done, 8 others are working on that as well. Since we know we can't get that from our legislature, we are going to get it, we're trying to get it from the League of Cities and Towns, which already passed a resolution a couple of years ago in 2019 in favor of the ERA. and the Intertribal Association, which has already passed a resolution in favor. So both of those things are in process here in Arizona. Next slide. So what difference will it make? Many people say that. Well, what difference does it make anyway? We already have our rights. Well, here's one good thing. When people say to you, women already have all their rights. If women had all their rights under the 14th Amendment, why did we need the 19th Amendment to vote? We shouldn't have needed it, right? That's what a lot of people say. Well, you got all your rights under the 14th, due process, equal protection, all of that. Well, it isn't true legally. But not only that, a simple question that stops them in their tracks is, then why did we need the 19th to vote? Huh? The really important reason, or what will be important from this, is it will raise the level of scrutiny of discrimination cases. When a court looks at a discrimination case, it has 3 levels that it can look at. The strict scrutiny is reserved for people who are named in the Constitution. And as they said in Dobbs, women are not in the Constitution, which of course we are in the 19th, but women are not in the Constitution, so we can't base our rights on the Constitution. So he said that in Dobbs. So there's some more proof to you that we've got to be in the Constitution. So if we are specifically named, then we get strict scrutiny, which means a court really has to look hard and deep at what the discrimination is and how it impacts people and why they did it. And usually we win. Right now, the standard for women is intermediate. And that is just what it says, intermediate. And that means they don't look as hard and you lose more often. And the lowest level is, which is what women used to be for many, many, many years, is rational relation. If you can find any rational relation between what they did and what the law is, then you can let it run, even if that isn't true, even if that isn't why they did it. But the ERA applies to both men and women, to everybody, because it says sex. It doesn't say men and women. That was changed from the original one that said men and women to say sex. So it applies to everybody. Next. I think that's the end.
That's the end. And that was a very quick history. And you did mention quickly, Diane, just briefly, that there's something going on tomorrow. And I was wondering if Representative Gutierrez could bring us up to speed. What's going on in the House of Representatives?
Sure, I can. And Diane, please interject, because I am new to this. So tomorrow, I am going to ask to suspend the rules and have this HCR, what is it, 2030 heard on third read right then and there. We're thinking that they're going to just say, okay, we quit for the day, bye-bye, go away. But the next step would then be to have one champion, because they killed our debate. We're not allowed to debate. So we have chosen one person to speak about why this is so important and why we should hear it. And then they'll either hear it or they will recess for the day. So did I get it right?
Anything to add?
They
Okay.
have done that before. One of the years they did that. They immediately, as soon as it was done, somebody called for a motion to adjourn, which overrides all other motions. Boom, they adjourned and everybody ran out the door, and that was the end of it. But yes, they could do that.
We scare them that much.
I'm interested in hearing from both of our members of the legislature on, you're both new. You're still kind of doe-eyed, I presume, or maybe it's too late in the session for that to be true. But I'm interested in hearing whether you're hopeful and what the power of protest, means from where you sit in the legislature. Because at this point in a minority caucus, protest is a big part of what you're doing there.
I mean, yes, I am hopeful. I think we have to have hope. It's what gets me to the ledge every day and to the education committee, where they keep passing these hideous, awful bills through our committee. But when I get to explain my vote, and when I get to explain my vote on the floor, that gives me hope. And that is my protest. And that is what I was elected to do, was bring the voters, and especially for me as a current teacher, bring those voices and put them on record. I absolutely believe in the power of protest, and we have that, and we have to keep it strong. And I think when we do that, the other side, ignores or says really inappropriate things, and they just are getting themselves voted out for the next time. And every time we raise our voices, we help our Governor Hobbs, we help her veto these horrible, discriminatory, offensive bills.
Yeah, I'll jump in to say the same thing, that, exactly what Representative Gutierrez said, as well as, they've got the numbers just barely, but they hold themselves together pretty strongly. I don't know what they're doing behind the closed doors to twist the, the arms of those what would be the more moderate members, but they keep them in line, and they are able to get their horrendous bills passed on a party line vote. But when we stand up on the floor and ask questions and expose the hypocrisy, it gets under their skin. And in the Senate, I mean, it is controlled. The president of the Senate is from the more far right faction of the Republicans, and so they are perfectly happy to spend our time passing the worst wasteful bills that are targeting, drag shows and election fraud and all of these things that are not actual solutions to issues that we're facing, but it does get under their skin when we stand up and ask them to explain why they're doing this, and then we can get them on the record also explaining that, this bill is actually intended to target drag shows, or this bill is actually intended to target Tucson, and it makes them look bad, and then they are not happy, and sometimes they've even started to refuse to answer questions during debate. Will the sponsor take questions? And they say no. And it shows that they are responsive to when we get up there and we make some kind of protest, because they know at the end of the day, they can pass everything that they want. So it almost doesn't matter how much protest we show, but it does matter because they respond in this way. So we know it makes a difference.
And since you're both new, would you mind sharing a bit about, we spend a lot of time telling folks, reach out to your representative, reach out to your senator, email them, request to speak. I'm interested in sort of hearing, do you all feel that? Do you read the emails and advice for our folks at home who would like to advocate on this, among other issues?
Yeah, I guess I'll go first this time. Okay. Yes. So all of that's really helpful. Our email inboxes become really packed full of emails on a variety of issues. And so it may not be that we're able to actually read every single email that comes in, but we do get a sense, right? I'm scrolling through the email inbox and I see, okay, there's a bunch of emails on this particular bill. And, even if they might be repetitive, it gives that sense. And then RTS is very important. I'm sitting in committee, I'm sitting on the floor, and I'm checking that for names that I recognize. So when I see Diane's name on RTS, I'm like, aha, this is important. It just, it helps me place, is this one of those really bad bills, or is this like one of those, not almost nothing bills that might be okay. And then finally, the final thing is if you're able to testify in committee, I think that is super powerful, or even just to show up and sit in committee when there's important bills. And of course, calendars change all the time and bills are getting put on the schedules. And so it's hard to really get the word out well in advance to be there for an important bill. But But that's also helpful to just see people. For us sitting up on the dais, it can feel like, oh, we're just talking to an empty room, no one's really paying attention. And so it's good to have people in the room to remind us people are watching, and especially to know that our supporters are watching. And then even more so if you can testify.
I'll just add very quickly that the form emails don't get read. I mean, they just don't. We'll get 100 of them overnight, and I don't have time to read. I note them. I take a tally of how many I get on each side. But if you can write a personal email, even use some of the wording from, from the form letter, but that will get it it'll give it a better chance of actually being read. So make it personal, reach out to your representative, tell them that you are a member, tell them where you live, and then look at the people who are going to be seeing what you care about in committee. We all have so many bills that we're trying to keep track of in committee that it's hard to spend a lot of time on bills that aren't in our committees. I go back to them when they're on floor, but it's a lot. So really target the people who are going to see those bills in committee would be my best advice, because it is a lot. It's a lot of emails, but RTS is always great. I always read those. And yes, if you can come to committee, please do. But if you're, like we're from Tucson. So and I was teaching last year. I couldn't just drive up to the Capitol, emails and RTS are the best way, and phone calls are logged as well.
And what time tomorrow in the House?
1:15, we're on the floor. So by 1
1:15.
o'clock, you could get a seat in the gallery. Absolutely. And if you wear white, purple, and red, that's what we're asking our members to do, is wear white, not red. Sorry. It's been a long day. White, purple, or green. I've already got my outfit picked out. I did that when I was much more coherent when I got home. Those are the ERA colors. If you have a sash, wear a sash. And I'll be happy to recognize you all in the gallery. That might tip them off, but I mean, they're going to do what they're going to do.
I'll have buttons and stickers, ERA buttons and stickers for anybody who doesn't have it, but I don't have any more sashes. They're all gone in January.
Yep.
Well, if that is an
Okay,
incentive to show up, Diane, buttons and stickers. I wanted to talk a little bit about the cultural issues. Anita mentioned, things have gotten worse since the pandemic started on the pay equity issues. And then, I'm an attorney. I used to work in law firms, and we'd call it the partner problem. Like when Priya and I were in law school, there were more women in our law school class than men. And then when I went to work in a law firm, there were more women in every associate class than men. But then you get up to the partner level, junior partners, senior partners. I'm not at a law firm anymore. And I'm just wondering how much of this is going to get fixed by the ERA, and how much of this is a cultural problem, or is the law going to drag these cultural problems? I'm asking you to predict the future, Diane, but it's an interesting question for me.
Well, as you know how discrimination works, it's become tougher and tougher to win discrimination cases. Back in the early days when Title VII was first passed, all we had to do was show that there was a 5% African Americans in Arizona, and they only had 1% of African Americans working for them, and we could win. Or you could, use those percentages with, women or anybody else. That all went down the toilet, and it's gotten harder and harder and harder to win the cases over the years. So now statistics will not do it for you. We use statistics to show, well, women are, 52% of the law school class, but they're only 10% of the senior partners. Well, that's not going to cut it anymore, because now you have to show intent. And you have to show that the women wanted those senior partners, that they applied for those senior partners, that they were qualified for those senior partners. Well, as you know, we talked about earlier regarding the fact that our workplaces are not women friendly. That, you know, for paid leave, for children in the workplace, for daycare, they're not women friendly. And so women don't do it, not because they don't want it or can't do it, but because of our hostile environment for women workers. So those are not, I wouldn't even call them cultural problems. I would call them patriarchal problems. And no, it's not going to solve everything. It will help. It's not going to be a silver bullet and solve every problem. No, it won't. But it will give us more power, more surety that our rights won't be taken away. Like we lost Roe v. Wade. Because if it's in the Constitution, it can't be undone like a piece of legislature or like another Supreme Court overthrowing a decision of an earlier Supreme Court. You can't do that. If you remember Prohibition, when it's in the Constitution, if you want to get rid of it, you got to pass another amendment to take it out of the Constitution. And that's what they had to do with Prohibition. So once we get it in, they can't take it away from us quite so simply, but it will help. As I explained the difference in strict scrutiny versus intermediate scrutiny, it won't solve every problem.
Could it help also, if I can just ask, because, you know, we're seeing in Florida, you can't talk about, girls can't talk about their period, and they want to track girls' periods in schools. I mean, I'm imagining that this would help say that's unconstitutional. That, I mean, well, medically it's unconstitutional and it's stupid. I just, in my classroom, I say period all the time just because it should be normalized. But anyway.
It's already unconstitutional today under the First Amendment. You do not need the ERA to make that stupidity unconstitutional. It already is.
Okay.
Well, and you know, on the note of trying to ensure that we don't get our rights rolled back, as Anita mentioned in the opening, I mean, when I was going through law school with you, Megan, I thought, wow, everything's getting better. We're on the up and up. Everything's culturally, we will get to the point where we don't have to, you know, keep fighting for these laws to be put into place and our rights to be cemented. But yeah, I no longer work at a law firm either. And I timed my babies around when I knew I had a secure job and I was past that 1 year so that the FMLA would kick in, right? You know, it really impacts our lives, and then unfortunately we continue to see the setbacks. Not just, you know, Dobbs of course last year was huge, but you know, this legislature in Arizona is just continuing and tying it back to the cultural piece. Like they're trying to ban diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings so that, you know, we absolutely, you know, we definitely cannot rely on the cultural piece to push us forward, because they're trying to just ban any sort of trainings that would get us there.
And I'm interested in, I mean, it seems like for a variety of reasons, one being just the new makeup of the legislature, but there is not really a persuadable contingent anymore on the other side of the aisle on some of these issues. Am I reading that right? Or I'm interested in your collective take.
I think we keep trying to find any little crack we can, because that's our job. But I haven't found one that would be willing to come to our side for these issues. No.
Yeah, our Senate leadership is definitely coming from the far right side. I think that this is the pattern that will stay this way until the vetoes start rolling in. There are a few. There's only 30 of us in the Senate. So of the 16 Republicans, I think there are a few Republicans who would identify as more moderate. They're just not willing to break off yet. And I think until the vetoes start coming more rapidly, we're not going to see their motivation to break off. So hopefully soon.
And
Okay.
they do get a lot of, I mean, they take flack from their party. I'm ranking on regulatory affairs and I meet with the chairman every week, and he has taken so much ridicule for daring to meet with, you know, little old me. So the ones who want to be moderate and run government how it's supposed to be, you know, talking to each other are blasted and take a lot of flack for it. But some of them do that. I mean, we don't vote the same way, but at least we meet.
Yeah. I'm interested in, you know, what you predict for the future. Diane in particular, I know you've been involved in this for so long. You know, how close are we? Is this something that you know, think we're going, you know, I know you remain hopeful, but how long is this going to take us? And are we close?
Absolutely, we're very close, and we say that all the time. This is the closest we've ever been, and it is in fact in the Constitution. And when in 2024, when we take back the House, it's done. It's done. And we do that here in Arizona, and Arizona will be ratified. So that is what we have to do. But what's the hope comes from the young people. Those of you who came to the reception we had back in January, whenever that was, whenever it was, Nancy,
Somewhere.
we had a bunch of young people, the Generation Ratified people. They were in high school. Some of them are now in college. They are very, very energized. They're very active. They're doing national, one of the local ones who lives in Chandler is on the national board planning things in Washington. They're very on top of it. And as you know, CHISPA and LULAC and a lot of those organizations are big on environment. And there is just a lot happening with this young cohort. I love them because I'm thinking they're like I was when I was their age, you know, and that's great because they are going to push this forward.
Excellent. I was wondering if you wanted to plug your, and I can repost it in the chat for you, Diane, the event Latina Expressions Art Exhibit.
Right. For the Women's History Month, now wanted to do something obviously particular and found out that the Latino Arts and Cultural Center at 147 East Adams was already having a month-long, well, actually it's a 3-month-long show of Hispanic women's art. So they had the show March, April, and May. It will be hung. It is hung. And so we decided to piggyback with that and have an event on March 30th from 6 to 8. The actual museum is closed at that time, but they open for special events. This will be a special event. It'll be open from 6 to 8, so you can, you know, look at the art. We'll have wine and cheese, and we will have Latina electeds from the legislature, corporation commission, city council, school boards, wherever, the water board, wherever they come from, who'll be able to give a few minutes of hello to everybody. So please come by. It's free. It's going to be fun. We do want to have fun in this revolution. If I can't dance in your revolution, I don't want to be there. So come and join us.
Excellent. And I was hoping that you could each sort of give us some parting words on, I know there's a lot going on right now. There's a lot going on around the globe. It's often, I feel like my house is on fire. You know, it's hard to keep your hands on the pulse of all of these different issues. The ERA remains important, and I'm just interested in, you know, what would you leave this group with, who, by the way, a lot of these folks have time on their hands, don't mind volunteering, like to support good causes, care about this one in particular. So what kind of final thoughts would you leave these folks with?
Well, I would say 2 things. I put several things in my slideshow that they should do, like contacting your federal representatives and different things. And there's also a list at the end of the abortion funds and other things where you can assist. So are you going to send out the,
Yes,
okay, so they'll have that to look at. And secondly, I would like to just push the green wave. I don't know if you know, but this came up at the Arizona list event. Yes, the green wave has hit the US, and many of the countries in South America and Central America have become more open on abortion and reproductive rights. And those people are here and now they're working with us. So I would let Priya and Nancy give their final words.
Should I go first? Okay. I'll say, show up tomorrow if you can. It sounds like it's going to be a great time. I think this is one of those fun time protests to be at. So tomorrow at 1, I think I'm going to try to also head over to the House before I have to head back to the Senate. And I'll also find out what shenanigans we might be up to in the Senate to try to complement, because I think that would be great. And then second, it's great, especially with time, if you've got time to help monitor the emails that you're getting and show up at committee hearings that are relevant. But I'm also eyes on 2024, and I think we can flip our legislature. So if you can volunteer or donate for legislative campaigns near you, we could really change the face of this state.
I would echo both Senator Sundaration and Diane. Yes. And then I also want to uplift education. The radical right is trying to privatize education. They're trying to ban books. They're trying to destroy public education. And that is our future. Like you said, Diane, the kids are our future. They really are. And so we cannot let public education be privatized and destroyed by them.
Excellent. I do have one question in the chat. Why hasn't this forced birth or pro-family legislative majority addressed issues like paid family leave? Be a great one to end on.
We have had so many bills that great bills that address housing and family leave and feeding kids, and they don't see them. It's just it. They have the majority. They will not see any of our bills. And I guarantee we had 400 Democratic bills in the House. They saw 30 in committee. 13 made it through committee to the floor. We haven't even seen them. So it's not that we're not trying. We are fighting. We're meeting with stakeholders, but they are the gatekeepers.
Yeah, and just to add, it's the hypocrisy does not shame them. That's the other thing, is that, they say they espouse these values. Well, if you do, then support people with the children that they have to have. But, that next step is not, it falls on deaf ears.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you guys so much for participating in this panel. This has really been an all-star panel during the legislative session, which is not easy to pull off.
Somebody has a hand up. Somebody has a
We
hand
have
up.
a raised hand.
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
First of all, I have to admit that I may not spend enough time listening to the news and reading newspapers, but I wonder, in all the things that you've talked about addressing, particularly in relation to the ERA, what about the issues affecting transgender people?
They're huge. I am a huge ally, and those are also bills, that they won't hear, and that they are actively trying to persecute our transgender brothers and sisters and non-binary folks. And it's horrible. And we're trying to fight against that. And they are gatekeeping those bills. But we are trying, and we will always try.
And Diane, thoughts on how the ERA would affect, laws against trans folks?
Well, that's the point of the fact that it says sex.
Right.
It doesn't say men and women, it says sex. So it applies to everyone, and that's the point.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you all again so much. And I want to turn it over to Julie Gunnigal, who's going to leave us with some parting words and some action items.
Yes. So first of all, can we do a virtual round of applause for our amazing panelists and our moderator this evening? Awesome. Awesome. This was incredibly informative as always. Well done, y'all. On top of the two events that you've been invited to, one being tomorrow for the ERA and the other, the Latina Expressions Art Exhibit sponsored by Now and Arizona List. The Arizona chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women want to invite you to a field trip at the Capitol. So we've been watching what other groups have been doing, and especially for people who are maybe new to the advocacy space, to help you feel comfortable, to let you know how to sign in to speak, maybe meet with a few of our legislators, and to become more comfortable with what the environment is on the Capitol. We will be launching our field trip. It will be at noon on April 4th. Look through your emails. You will have a more formal invitation shortly, and we would be delighted to see you all there. That's all I've got. Sivia, you want to really take us out of here?
Thank you. And thank you to our amazing panel. Thank you to Megan and Julie and Anita for putting this together. So it is so critical. I do want to underscore that when we tried to get the ERA passed in Arizona last go around, NCJW played a significant role. And we filled the gallery. We participated in the, what was it, Diane? 38-mile
Oh, yes,
walk.
the 38-mile walk, yes.
And we got out letters, we got clergy to be involved. And you can, an important thing to remember is if there are businesses, we tried to get signs posted in various businesses as well, saying they supported it. The business community, the corporate community must begin to look at things through a gender lens. And if we, in a state like this where development is such a priority, we must get businesses involved. So I do want to underscore for those who may be new to NCJW AZ's programs that we are committed to access for abortion, gender equity, economic parity, all of the topics that need to be changed in this country and in this state. And we are on the front lines, lobbying, meeting with legislators, providing talking points, making sure, as our two legislators said, that they have the talking points so that the governor can also have substantive grounds based on the record for fighting these bills. I was on calls today on several bills that are so dangerous, meeting with different stakeholders, trying to get them to work against these bills. So we welcome your involvement. We welcome your support. We need to build our legislative team, our advocacy teams, and we would love all of you to be involved. So thank you again for participating. Thank you so much to the panels. I would like to point out that Diane is a partner in so much of what we do. Diane and Now are co-plaintiffs in our lawsuits against the abortion bans, and we work together on so many issues. So thank you, Diane, for being a partner. And good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.